The Sine Institute of Policy and Politics is American University's incubator for policy innovation. We convene leaders in the academic, public, private, nonprofit, and journalism sectors to engage and promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. In an evolving world, we seize the opportunity to work on the nation's most pressing challenges through collaboration by experts and top scholars in their field with students in research and scholarship. As part of that goal, the Sine Institute leverages American University's location in our nation's capital, the nexus of government and a growing international business center. We connect diverse perspectives from around the country and around the world with our world-class academics and research, experienced practitioners, and the most politically active student body in the U.S. We stand apart through our focus on the role of business and the nonprofit community in public policy, the rise of the importance of economic regions in the United States, and international policy issues. Our focus is to make an immediate impact at the intersection of policy and politics that leads to real and lasting change. Thank you for joining us as we convene, communicate, and collaborate. And now introducing 2023 Sine Fellow, the Honorable Bill de Blasio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Sine Institute Fellows Seminar today. My name is Ava Gadden. I'm the Administrative Assistant for the Sine Institute. And on behalf of myself and Sine, we are so pleased that you all have joined us today. The Sine Institute is a laboratory for university-wide collaboration and an incubator for policy innovation, convening the best and brightest in the public, private, academic, and nonprofit sectors, as well as journalism. The Institute is where the brightest minds engage to promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. It is where American University comes to convene, communicate, and collaborate. Today, we are honored to have our fellow, the Honorable Bill de Blasio, join us. Bill de Blasio is an American political leader who served as the 109th mayor of New York City from 2014 to 2021. A member of the Democratic Party, he held his office of New York City Public Advocate from 2010 to 2013. De Blasio started his career as an elected official on the New York City Council, representing the 39th District in Brooklyn from 2002 to 2009. Mr. de Blasio has joined us on campus to share his experiences with politics and policy, taking on the contentious issue of education and actually making progress. Through this issue, he will help us navigate how the sectors come together to make real change. No issue elicits more passion or causes more controversy in America than education. Please welcome the Honorable Bill de Blasio.
Thank you. I assume it's working. Thank you very much, Ava. Everyone, welcome. I want to say happy Valentine's Day to everybody. I love you all for being here. I'm going to speak very briefly to begin. I want to maximize dialogue. So I'm going to ask Samantha, she's sitting right there, tell me when it's been 10 minutes. And then if I keep going, tell me when it's been 15 minutes. I'll go no more than 15 minutes. Here we go. So I'm going to start with a story that really was the basis. By the way, there's more seats in front, so if anyone comes in, fill out the seats. Plenty of great seats in front. I'm going to tell you a story that really was the basis for why we ended up creating pre-K for all in New York City. I'm at a hospital with my wife. She has just given birth to our first child, Kiara. We're talking to the hospital personnel, and it's checkout time from the hospital. And I'm sitting there wondering what the hospital wants to know about our ability to parent. What do we know about parenting? What resources do we have? Are we ready? The hospital doesn't want to know those things. The hospital wants to know only one thing. Do we have a car seat? We had a car seat. Having gotten that answer and having their evidence, they allowed us to take our daughter home. We go into our apartment in Brooklyn. We had a futon couch. We go up to our futon couch. We bring our child in, still in the car seat. We put her on the futon couch. We step back. We look at our daughter. We look at each other. And we say to each other, now what do we do? And this is a true story. And the now what do we do extended to everything the parenting experience, but fast forward to when it came time for our kids to need a place to learn before the opportunities for public school were guaranteed to them. So early child education, when kids are 3, when kids are 4, even earlier for many families. And what we found in Brooklyn, but I know it's true all over this country, is it was extremely difficult to find quality and affordable early child education for our family. And what is more basic when you think about it? Like, every family needs this across every region, every demographic. And yet, as we experienced, it is not only not guaranteed, it's really, really difficult. It's really stressful. It's really expensive. It's really hard to find. And a lot of places, especially in rural America, it just doesn't even exist. So at the time we were looking, families were paying $10,000 or more per child. In New York today, you've got families $15,000, $20,000 if they want a safe, quality place for their child to be during the day where they're learning. And we said to ourselves, this is just impossible, that this is what it's come down to. That everyone is being put through a stress together that could easily be avoided if our society actually valued children, valued families, valued people having a quality family experience. In fact, as a matter literally of policy, we were adding stress and expense and confusion to people's lives because somehow it got written that the first time you get to go to school, to public school, is when you're 5 years old. Even though science tells us the most powerful learning period for a child is between 0 and 5, in America, we only latch on to that last part, that last year, and we miss all the rest. The numbers, about a third today of children in America, after a lot of work in the last decade or two, only about a third get early child education at the age of 4. And when it comes to the age of 3, it's only 6%. Now, if you care about families, children, education, but also if you care about our economy, if you care about national security, you name the concern, when we're missing the opportunity to educate the vast majority of our children when we could best help them and support them and set them on the path, we've got a profound problem. But on top of that, this problem exacerbates all the disparities of our society, because the children who do get the opportunity disproportionately are higher income and white, and the children left out disproportionately people of color and or lower income. And of course, immigrant communities constantly get left out of this equation. So we do not, by the way we approach it in this country, we don't create equality, we don't create opportunity, we don't give everyone the same starting line, we don't maximize our potential as a country. Other countries don't make this mistake. So very quickly, we get to New York City, 2012, and I had been thinking about this for a long time. And one day, as I'm preparing to run for mayor, and this really happens sometimes in life, you've heard the famous phrase, the back of the envelope, the back of the napkin. I am sitting with one of my policy people. Her focus was education, children, families. We get into a conversation, we take out a napkin, because we're like at a diner, and we start saying, well, what would it take to do pre-K for all in New York City? Because we had some pre-K, but a lot of kids get left out. Most kids did not get full day. So we knew we had something. So we said, well, we have something. What would it take? We started sketching it out. And then we started talking as a team. What would it take to pay for it? And how do we make people feel this issue? And we put it all together and came up with a very simple and elegant proposal that we thought was probably going to be extremely controversial and that a lot of people would think was impossible. We said, let's tax wealthy New Yorkers, people who make $500,000 or more, pay a little more in taxes, so every single child can have pre-K for free in New York City. Put out the proposal. Well, guess what? It was controversial and people thought it would be impossible. And there was all these wonderful articles and editorials saying, this is just absolute madness. How dare he? And of course, how dare he suggest taxing the wealthy? They'll all leave New York City. Michael Bloomberg, this is such a great quote. Michael Bloomberg is asked about it in a press conference the days after. And he said, if he gets his way, everybody will leave New York City. which was very telling about Michael Bloomberg, because his idea of everybody was people who made more than 500,000 a year. So, so I made it the centerpiece of my mayoral campaign. We won. We had to, and it's a long story I won't get into, but we had to go fight in our state capital in Albany to get funding. We fought for a tax on the wealthy. Our governor then, Governor Cuomo, who I didn't always agree with, he did not want a tax on the wealthy. He wanted me to stop pushing. I was not going to stop pushing because this was the thing I ran on and believed in. And in the creative tension that is the legislative and political process, we were able to get the next best thing and get $300 million in funding each year to help make it happen. We realized that just having it was not the same as people understanding it, so we created a massive public outreach effort. And we sent folks from the city of New York, trained organizers and activists and outreach folks into communities, but not just to PTA meetings or not just to formal community gatherings, but to beauty salons, to barbershops, to street fairs, wherever people were, to connect with families and say, here's this new thing that could be transcendent for your child. And by the way, is free. And people, everyone who is interested in public policy, it took a while to convince people it was free. And I went one day to Southeast Queens. There was a storefront of a community-based organization that was sponsoring a pre-K program as one of our colleagues, one of the organizations that was part of this. And I walked up to visit it, and it said, pre-K for all, and then all over the storefront, in every combination of colors and shapes, it said the word free, 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 free. And I said, wait a minute, they're telling me something here. That it was so important to go out to parents, explain what it was, hear their concerns, help them understand what it means for their child, really let them know, looking them in the eye, this is free, this is for you, this is for your family. And folks started to get into it. And word spread. And I'll finish the story by saying, we set a trap for ourselves. We set a trap on purpose. We wanted to do something revolutionary. We understood there was only a brief period when you're first elected, you have a lot of political capital. When an idea is really being deeply felt, there's a momentum, there's an energy. We had put it to the core of our campaign. We had won the battle in Albany. We had had this outreach effort all over the summer. People were feeling it. There were banners all over New York City. You went to a public park, you went in front of a school, anywhere, you'd see pre-K for all banners. And we realized we had one chance to do it right. So the trap we set for ourselves on purpose from the beginning of our campaign is we said that even though at that point there were only 20,000 kids in full-day pre-K in New York City, we pledged that by September of the first year in office, we would make it 53,000. By September of the second year in office, it would be 70,000, which is the top number we thought would actually want this. And we used that public pledge to make everyone do their job with energy and focus and creativity. We used the pledge to bring out the best in ourselves and not give ourselves a way out, but also to create energy out in the community that something special was happening. And all of the professionals, those outreach workers and the teachers and the principals and the IT folks and you name it, everyone felt they were part of something that was going to make history, that was going to change lives. And the effort that people went to, they didn't care what hour of the day it was, they didn't care if it was summer, they didn't care, they wanted to get this done. They believed it would change our city. And maybe even beyond, because if New York City could do it, it would set a model that could be an inspiration elsewhere. So this incredible human energy brought this together and made it happen. And the last thing I'll say is that the idea is so fascinating. If you want to make change, the power of an idea and the relentlessness that you can bring to it to light the the match, and bring out incredible possibilities. The idea was a purely egalitarian idea. That instead of a situation where some children got every benefit, some children spent their 4-year-old year in front of a television at auntie's house or a neighbor's house because there was no other choice. No, they couldn't afford anything else. They weren't being offered anything else. Nothing else was available. Instead of a society where some people got the perfect start for their children and others got no start for their children. Where some children were shown incredible respect and love and were valued by what was given to them, and other children de facto were shown an example that they were not valued by our larger society, by our government. We turned that on its head, and we said everyone starts at the same starting line. Everybody. That literally it was a universal right in New York City. If it was something that was right for your child, here it was. It's yours. It's free. We want your child to reach their fullest potential. And it actually happened. Thank you. Okay, so my student associates, I want to thank them all. We had very good conversations, and we said we're going to keep the opening very brief to maximize dialogue. That could be questions, that could be comments, that could be critiques, whatever you want. I want to hear from you, and I want to get to as many people as possible. So I know we're in Washington, D.C., but I want you to act like New Yorkers and be aggressive.
Well, first, coming from New York City, just want to say thank you for everything that you've done. My question is, knowing that you've created this program for universal pre-K, in what have you done to ensure that students were able to receive the maximum opportunities? Like, what was being taught in classrooms to these students, so that way they learned and they knew how to, fight for what they want, fight for equity?
Well, I think the way I would say it, I don't think it was the pure sort of abstract, like explaining equity to 4-year-olds. I think it was showing them by example. And I think it was empowering them on the academic side. You had kids who were working with numbers and letters and concepts and, sentences and one thing or another that they would not have gotten to for at least a year. So kids were getting off to a strong academic start, which I think was obviously empowering. But the social element also was huge. I heard from so many parents that kids came out of their shell. Kids that might have been sort of timid got very social, got very engaged. Kids that might have been a little fearful got bold. They learned how to be in a group. And I'm a believer in public education. In our next seminar in March, we're going to talk about public education and its meaning and where we're going with it. But one of the things I think is so important is that the socializing experience, I think, is incredibly empowering. When kids can succeed in a group setting and be acknowledged, and their parents see it, it opens up a world of possibilities. And we saw that very consistently across every community. Okay, I'm going to keep going around, giving people opportunity. I'm giving opportunities to speak. Go.
So one thing that I'm not too well educated on, but I know a lot of friends who have been to such schools, but Montessori education is kind of blown up as a giant thing recently. And I just want to see your thoughts on Montessori preschool, and if that actually had any success in New York City that you've seen.
Yeah, it's a great model, and it works for a lot of kids and families. I don't know if it works for every family, but I think it's a great model. Our public schools have a good collaborative relationship with the Montessori schools. But I think where there's some common ground is the notion of nurturing and respecting children and reaching them early. I think these are all sort of really powerful concepts. And from what I understand of the Montessori approach, my kids didn't go to one, I didn't experience it personally, but I think when it's when you get children early, it is much more familial and communal. And parents really engage in a different way. And I don't, having been a working parent, my wife was a working parent. I get it. Over the years, it's harder and harder to be right up in the middle of your kids' education, supporting it. But when you come on down, plenty of seats. When you see pre-K, and then we went on to 3K. I want to emphasize that. We saw the success of pre-K and we said, well, why are we stopping? And we have created a model for universal 3K that's not fully complete, but is well along the way in New York. It really causes family members to see their role in education as well, because teachers need that alliance with parents and other family members. So I think that's where there's some of that parallel to Montessori as well. I'll come over this side of the room, back there.
So obviously with universal pre-K, that costs more money for New York City public schools, which is the largest school district in the country. I'm wondering, how do you deal with the issue of making sure that the pre-K programs get enough funding as opposed to K through 12, which people tend to pay more attention to and see as being the most in need of funding?
Because it's Valentine's Day, I want to say I love your question. So if I said to you that the thing that's less important is getting all the funding and all the attention, should we just leave it that way? You, being an American university student, would say, no, we shouldn't leave it that way. We should do the thing that's more important. And I hate to be simplistic, but I really think this is the essence of the matter. Our education system is not built, it's not built for the 21st century. It's arguably not even built for the 20th century. It is based on an agrarian calendar, so that, why is it not year round? So that the young people could go out and work in the fields. That's literally the basis of it, right? The time of day doesn't make sense in terms of young people's sleep rhythms. And we start in this country, if you're lucky, you start at 5. There are a lot of parts of this country that still have only half-day kindergarten. So literally, if 0 to 5 is the amazing developmental window and you basically eat up all of it, think of how illogical that is. So my simple statement is, we should shake the foundations of our entire approach to education on many levels, beginning with, why the hell are we starting so late? So 4-year-old layup, obvious. We weren't 100% sure whether 3-year-olds en masse would work. It was stunning. The 3-year-olds adapted to the school setting across the board, all demographics. And then we asked them to wear masks during COVID, and they did that too, pretty effortlessly. So my argument is, if you can find new resources, great, add them on, do pre-K, do 3K. Let's say you can't. I would say this to any school superintendent or any mayor, governor in the country. Then shift within your education budgets to early childhood, because you are going to have much better educated kids. You're going to reach their potential more. You're going to see the multiplier effect of reaching kids early. It will allow them to unleash their academic potential and intellectual potential, as well as all the social positive factors. And if you don't, then are you blaming the kids that they don't quite get where they might have gone because you started them too late? Is that their fault or your fault? So that would be my argument. It's purely strategic.
Yeah, I was curious how your interest in those other policymakers at this time when you were designing and building pre-K, how it also affected the latter half of education in New York, because I know there was a move, of course, where I'm not 100% sure if there's for free education. I know universities in New York used to provide
Right.
college, and that had changed drastically, which obviously caused a great detriment and maybe even a hole in people leaving New York City. How have strategists or yourself feel like this idea is affecting to also shake the foundations of later education?
So you're right. City University used to be free in New York City and was part of sort of the renaissance of New York City generations ago. Like this incredible wellspring of talent came out of the public colleges. The state of New York now runs our public colleges, including the city ones. They've been extremely adverse to the notion of going free. If Bernie Sanders hadn't come along and some others, it wouldn't even be a discussion, is the truth. It's now, obviously, there's been some progress in New York State towards that direction. It's not full. I don't think the two pieces interrelated a lot, in truth. because we knew we couldn't do it. Wasn't our purview as the city of New York, and we couldn't afford it. And we also were trying to really do one thing right to begin and say, you know, a lot of kids would get to our city university schools and not do particularly well. And that was in part because they had been deprived of early childhood education. So I think all of these discussions are moving in a similar direction, but it never really kind of reached critical mass on the university level. But I should say, I think, let me just get a show of hands. Who here is interested in political campaigns? Raise your hand. Political campaigns. Okay. For the others of you, just learned something here. Okay. So I mentioned the back of the envelope, which really happened with my policy advisor 2012, and we had this idea. And for me, it was very much a hard idea. It was from my own family experience and what I thought people needed. And I thought it was good policy. The political folks in our world were like, disdainful is probably a little too strong, but let's just say they did not embrace it with open arms. And they're like, this, we can't even tell you how it polls because no one polls pre-K. Like it was not an issue in the public debate. They didn't have a sense of what it would mean to make this a focal point. And these were very good political people. These were all folks who had national experience, a lot of success. And it was fascinating because they missed a lot. And I will also say I missed a lot of the underlying meaning. And I'm saying this about how you make change. Why did it work when it seemed so unlikely? Why did it work? It was an issue that wasn't even really front burner in the public agenda, that wasn't even being polled, that wasn't part of debates and forums. Why did it work? It was about fighting inequality, which was the central message of my campaign. And New Yorkers had become distinctly upset about an ever more stratified city. So it really hit the note about fighting inequality, both because of the tax on the wealthy and because every child would start at the same starting line. It was about children and valuing children. It was about family and what I'm going to coin a phrase. I have a new phrase I'm going to introduce here at American. Get ready. The phrase is family values. I just came up with it. So it was about actual family values. I'm going to be partisan here, not family values that might be less than respectful to some families, but real family values that said, you know, we loved everyone, we cared about everyone, we valued our children, we were investing in our children. And it was like, we couldn't see how much energy this was creating. It did not show up in any of the traditional political or media methodologies, but it was like this fire. People were picking up on it, they were feeling it. And I'd like to say, and this is to finish the political point, that on primary night in 2013, in New York, we had a system where if no one got more than 40% of the vote, there was a runoff 2 weeks later. And we had been polling and we had been watching the trend lines and we were doing pretty well, but there was literally no one, myself included, who believed we would not, everyone believed we had to have a runoff. Just mathematically, there was no way to avoid a runoff. So much so that we had only one set of remarks for primary night, which is now we're going on to the runoff. Well, this issue and some others around fighting inequality was catching so much fire that lo and behold, on primary night, we won 41% of the vote. And there wasn't going to be a runoff. And we're literally sitting there like, well, what am I supposed to say? You know, like we don't have a victory scenario. Like, what do we do with this? But my point is, sometimes it's not about political science or the conventional wisdom. Sometimes it's about what's going on in people's lives. Often it's about what's going on in people's lives. And this captured an imagination in a different way. Okay, back out here. Anyone out here? This quadrant's very quiet. Okay.
First of all, bravo.
Thank you.
Great. Has there been any spillover to other parts of New York State? Has pre-K and pre-K expanded, you know, on Long Island or upstate?
I'm going to first say it's very important when you are an elected official or have been one to say when you're not 100% sure, say, I don't know. So I don't know enough to give you a scientific answer. I know the spillover was around the country. A lot of larger cities really latched on and worked with us to try and create their own. God bless President Biden because he put federal support for pre-K and 3K into Build Back Better, even if it didn't work yet. He still did. He was the first person ever to do that, to make it a national priority that way. He put it in the State of the Union again, which I appreciate. So I think it contributed to movement elsewhere. I don't think in New York State it's had the kind of impact I'd like to have, because our biggest cities are incredibly impoverished, don't get enough state aid, and their school systems are in deep trouble. And our suburbs are of New York City are very challenged by high property taxes, paying for education as it is. So I think New York State's a little stuck from my perspective, but there well may be progress I just don't know about. At least I know it got felt in many places. Yes.
Oh, I was wondering, how can our government or the current administration or even our society mend the education gap that really like blew up during COVID in an equitable way? And is this something that maybe has to do with now more like community building? Like, can we even trust, the government at this stuff anymore?
Yes.
Okay. Like what you did is great, but other than that.
No, it's a heartfelt and important question. I am not here to tell you everything government does is right on and thoughtful, but okay. So I think there's the question about learning loss, and I think there's a question about who's going to do something. Learning loss, this is a giant problem. But let's also put learning loss in perspective. The problem before learning loss was lack of learning. So, when we were really happy when our test scores would go up, but they still showed a huge number of kids not on grade level. So I think we need to acknowledge that the COVID reality has simply deepened a trend line that was already very present. What do you do about it? I am 100% convinced if you go earlier, that you can profoundly change the trajectory. We saw, and again, I'm not 100% sold on standardized tests, but we'll use them as one measure. We saw closure of the achievement gap starting to begin with the kids that were being tested in 3rd grade who had gone through pre-K universally. We saw the disproportionate impact it had, particularly for African-American and Latino kids. And that was in its nascent, year. I mean, imagine if you do this consistently and make it better all the time. Imagine if you go from 4 to 3 and then 3 to 2, you can start reaching kids, more elementally, but every bit counts. We do not focus on literacy in this country as a strategy. There's tremendous possibility there. We don't focus on the interplay of mental health, physical health, and education. There's tremendous possibility there. So I think we can address it. The 800-pound choose your animal is we're running out of teachers. So now I'll take the second part. Can you trust the government to do something about it? Well, government's about to get a really good chance to show it's got its stuff together. I'm going to keep it PG here. We have a national teacher shortage that was starting before COVID got greatly exacerbated. This thing is coming on like a freight train, and forget all the other things you might do to create equity or educational attainment. If you don't have teachers, you're kind of out of luck. It's going to take a huge national investment, as well as state and local, to right the ship to make teaching appealing, such so that many people in this room would say, wow, that's such a good deal. Maybe I should think about doing that. That's where we have to go. I think government could. I'm not yet betting the farm on it. And I think to the extent government isn't, then it's about grassroots activism to force the issue. Back? Anyone back?
What do you think is more effective performance measure of academic achievement besides high stakes testing? Because we know not all students have access to tutors, or some students don't teach well or don't test well, and that it creates teaching to the test.
I appreciate that question a lot. I think we have come a long way in consciousness in the last decade or so. Because you go back 10 or more years, I don't even think the question was being asked. And now I think it's the sort of main street of the discussion is high stakes testing at best can only take you so far. I'm a believer in the multiple measure approach. So I would argue there should not be any situation where a single test determines a child's future. For high school, for college, for anything, for honors programs, anything. We have had in New York, and I stopped it. 4-year-olds were being given standardized tests to decide whether they got into gifted and talented programs. And, you know, they were put on a track and there were winners and losers, and it had nothing to do with larger talent because it was one brief test. So the multiple measure approach to me would be, sure, standardized testing gives you something because of the comparability, but grades, participation portfolios, depending on the grade level, all of these things, and the voices of teachers bringing their observations. That's how you actually evaluate. And what a lot of good teachers, I think, will say is it's less about evaluating outcome. If we really want to address the achievement gap and all and the learning loss, it's less about achieving. It's less about addressing the final outcome as along the way using testing to make adjustments for each child on an individualized basis. We could individualize education a lot more because we could teach teachers better to do that and use technology. If you need more science and you need more math or whatever it is, there's ways to now, we did learn this in the pandemic, kind of augment the human piece with the tech piece and really work a plan for each child. That's kind of amazing. That's kind of promising. But that's using testing to get somewhere, not to just finally, you know, put a grade on a child at the end. Plenty of seats still. Come on down. Plenty of good seats. Okay, I'm going to the back quadrant here. Anybody? Yes.
What steps has New York taken to make sure there's equity between different areas? Like are we making sure someone in Queens is getting the same quality of pre-K as someone in Manhattan?
Thank you. But this was something we thought a lot about from the beginning. And you know, over the years we implemented, it was always a work in progress. And I want to say that very openly. You know, one of the theories of the case I'm trying to offer here is how you make change. One way you make change is never be a perfectionist. Perfect is always the enemy of good. Another way you make change is remembering something that I think is true in politics, true in policy, true in life. Where you start is not where you end. So when we said we're going from 20,000 kids to 53,000 and then 70,000 next year, and then in the middle of that, a few years later, we start 3K. Did we think our quality was everything we would want it to be ultimately? No. We thought it was good. We thought it was reasonably consistent. Did we think it was nirvana? No. We did believe that kids getting the opportunity to be in a classroom with other children, with caring professionals, to get an early start on their education would inevitably benefit them. And we had quality control measures that we were applying, you know, over thousands of locations. And then all the time making in-game adjustments. What can we do to keep improving? And trying to be very hands-on, helping each location with what they needed. That was the game plan. But it's really, you know, I love the phrase iterative. It is good, you know, you rarely get perfect policy on the first try. But you can make a lot of progress on the first try. And also don't get drunk on your own policy. Don't be like, oh, we've announced a policy, it's perfect, we're done. No, you started. You started. Now you're going to make a lot of adjustments if you're sincere about getting it right.
You talked a lot about the impact of socialization from a gap of 0 to 5. How have your schools been able to navigate COVID and the impacts on that and socialization, both during the pandemic and coming out of it with like re-socializing children?
So the interesting thing is early childhood was less affected than the older grades. And think about it for a moment. I sort of had to learn this from the educators who were going along. When you're in the older grades, you know, you're moving to different parts of your school, you have different course requirements, and, you know, it's a much more complex undertaking. When you're in pre-K or 3K, you're like in one classroom with one set of teachers, And even though there's always the possibility of COVID knocking out the classroom in the earlier experience of COVID, really the good news was it was kind of a closed community in terms of if you could keep COVID out, you were okay. You know, so they actually were able to keep their attendance a lot better than for the older grades. And kids, I mean, the other thing, I hate to be kind of stereotypical, but this just was true. I mean, kids are stunningly resilient. I mean, the younger, the more resilient in the sense of this, like I'm using the mask as an example. We really were like, okay, our 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds gonna be able to wear masks consistently? And they're like, oh, we're wearing masks now. You know, they're just, they went with it. And you could set good patterns in place. And they were the least susceptible to COVID and the impact of COVID. They were literally the group of people that COVID did the least to. So we were able to keep a lot more continuity there. But I think the problem, because pre-K and 3K are all socialization in one level. The much bigger challenge is you go up to middle school, high school, where the disconnect on academics was bad. The disconnect emotionally was worse. And so when we started the September 2021 school year, we did a mental health screening for all the students to try, literally 1 million students, to try to figure out who needed more support, because that's where the biggest problem was.
I'll also echo the bravo. I have 2 kids who attended DC's public school starting at age 3, and it was absolutely fantastic. And DC implemented its public preschool program over time. It's a much smaller city. And so I was wondering, what lessons can we take from the implementation of this massive, you know, quite quick, I appreciate the political capital comments and but the tension between quality and perfecting things over time. But, you know, thinking big and getting people to think big about policy, you know, what lessons can we take from that?
Thank you. One, if you don't think big, you will end up small. If you do think big, you'll at least get like medium. You know, I think that's literally, like, we did not know every day we were going to make our goal. In fact, there were many terrifying days when we were pretty worried. We got a lot of our design right. There were some pieces where we really missed on our initial assumptions, and we scrambled. And the scale was daunting. One of my favorite examples, someone brought this up to me in the middle of pre-K, that the number of kids that we were going to have the first year, the 53,000, the number of kids in full day pre-K in New York City when we got done in September 2014 was more kids than in the entire school system of San Francisco. So, you know, that was daunting. But I will say boldness, I'm not here to say, oh, do bold things and it's always going to work. No, I'm saying, first of all, if you don't attempt boldness, you self-limit. But second of all, you don't bring out the best in people. One of the really fascinating stories here is how much energy and effort was mobilized by the goal. The Berkman Center at the Kennedy School at Harvard did a really interesting study. If someone's into how do you construct something like this, they literally laid out the day-to-day and the different parts of the city government community that had to come together and the grassroots to make this work. It's very gripping, and it actually happened. So I think the lesson here is that there's a simplicity lesson in that one standard for everyone. The universality, sort of the power of entitlement in the good sense of the word, entitlement, the power of saying this is something for everyone, clarifies to everyone involved what their role is, including for the parent. It makes it, and by the way, you might say to me at any moment in this, well, what about all the places that don't have the resources? The first thing I'd say to him is, if you don't have the resources today and you don't have the resources tomorrow, then phase it in over 5 years, phase it in over 10 years. But if you make a goal that it's something for everyone, you actually energize the different pieces of the equation to achieve the goal. Also, crucially, and this is something we were very, very aware of, once you say you have to get to kids earlier or you are failing them, then you cannot let it ever slip away. And by making it an entitlement, we believed it would be very hard for anyone in the future, in New York City, in Albany, in Washington, to ever take it away. Like you would have to pry it off the cold, dead hands of parents, you know, because they were not going to let go of this thing they valued. So these are, I mean, I'm giving you, again, a very broad answer, but this is sort of strategically why I think we kind of ended up with something greater than the sum of the parts. Going back. I know you do.
Oh, sorry.
Pissed off at this poor back here just won't raise their hand. We're gonna get you. We're gonna get you. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. So I'm curious if you would ever be in favor of making K-12 schools for profit. Me personally, well, so like the pros that I have heard is that like investors would put on funding towards like education, the resources, and also other things. But for me personally, like I think that creates like a race to at the top approach where where like investors might favor predominantly white schools, urban schools like might be a further disadvantage, and like other factors that might ignore poverty status. And so like I'm curious if you are in favor of like for-profit.
First, I want to say thank you for your Valentine's themed hair. That's really going the extra mile. I do not favor that model. I think you're exactly right that it would inevitably lead to exclusion and sort of gaming the system and targeting where the money could be made rather than reaching kids who needed the most support. And we've seen some of those models attempted, and it's pretty damn clear. The profit motive is the profit motive. People are going to move toward that, not toward, hey, if I'm a kid who needs extra help, that costs more money, but no problem, we're going to help you anyway. No, profit motive tells you could we maybe send that kid elsewhere and focus on the profitable kids? So no, I think that's a trap. And I think the lesson we learned in a more egalitarian and inclusive approach is, and this is sort of one of these powerful underlying points, is let's imagine a world where it was in all of our interests for kids' talents to be fostered and to emerge. And I want people to just take a moment of reflection, and unfortunately a painful reflection. How many young people for generations had greatness in them that was ignored and denied, and what we all lost as a result? So no, you need the exact opposite of a for-profit model. Okay, this group is just in rebellion. Over here, nothing over here. Okay, this side again, yes.
So in the process of making education universal, how do you reconcile the different value sets that people have? Because, for example, when people send their kids to private school, it might not just be for the education, it might be because they belong to a specific religious group,
Sure.
and they want their kid to gain a certain sense of value. So how do you reconcile that across different?
That's a great question. We never mandated it. And I think this is important. You think of an entitlement, Social Security or Medicare, or go down the list now in New York City, pre-K for all, and I hope soon 3K would be pure entitlements. You don't have to take them if you don't want them. Like no one's saying, where the pre-K police are coming to your door to get your child. It's a choice because it's not part of the time period under law when kids are obliged to be in school. So it's really great to have that dialogue with parents about why it's good for their children. Now, some parents have an alternative that really is great and they can afford, or they just have their own preference. That's fine. But another fascinating sort of demographic reality is I thought it would be good for everyone. I thought, again, the entitlement dynamic would strengthen it for the long term. Ergo, of course, I thought people of different economic strata would be a part of it. When I have had parents come up to me and thank me, it is not just the parents who are in greatest economic need. And I've had a lot of parents, I would say, were solidly middle class, even upper middle class, who said, if this wasn't around, we would have had to leave New York City. Or if this wasn't around, we couldn't pay the rent or whatever it was. So I think the notion of something being for free and sincere, like obviously there's a constant effort to make it strong and quality. People picked up on that and then they wanted it. Like they didn't want to go pay for the expensive alternative when they could have their kids in a perfectly fine alternative with a diversity of other kids, which a lot of parents valued. And guess what? It was free. Okay, breakthrough. We're having a breakthrough. I have a report. The fourth quadrant has finally, this is like late-breaking election results. They're finally coming in. Wait, Maricopa County is now coming in and swinging the election for everyone. Go ahead.
I'm not sure I want to be Maricopa County today.
Well,
but thank you so much for speaking with us.
I personally like Maricopa County. That was a compliment.
That's valid. Thank you. So actually, what I was wondering a little bit was, it's kind of a two-part question, or it's one question, but it's about two different things. You touched a little bit on how we have sort of an outdated academic model across the board, and also the lack of emphasis on literature. So I wonder what your opinion is on the reason why we kind of don't value education on the whole in this nation. And also, I think when we do value education, more recently, the emphasis has really been on STEM rather than liberal arts or the humanities. So if you could talk a little bit about that, if you think I think it's a crisis, but what your opinion might be on what you're seeing there.
Well, you are going to the foundation with that question,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that. Yeah, we have a problem. And it's interesting. I do think part of what turned in our favor on pre-K was it was not just education, it was family. And I think maybe there's a little bit of a clue there as to where we need to go. It's not, look, there is an anti-intellectual tradition, that's fairly strong in this country, and a good anti-elitist impulse in this country, and also a whole lot of people have never had the benefit of education. And we got to remember that, like a college degree is still like, that's not fully the norm in this country. So I think there's a lot of foundational reasons why we don't have a consensus in our country of putting the full value on this. We should. I think there's some examples of it getting better. These very interesting movements around the country to increase teacher pay that have pretty consistently succeeded. I do think the STEM piece, you're right, that sort of captured a certain imagination, maybe because it's seen as more, material, more tangible, more practical. But you know what? I'll get on that train if it'll help people start to think, invest more in education, focus more on education. But I will say, to affirm your question, and I don't want to stereotype, but I think this is a fair point. Western European and Eastern Asian industrialized countries are not making this mistake by and large. They see education as national strategic, economic, national security, everything. And I think we're closer, but we're certainly not there. And just to burden all of you, I mean, this is, so, in the vein, I was talking with Amy Dacey earlier about how previous generations, my own included, maybe didn't solve every problem we should have for you. This is one I would urge people to take up, that redefinition of education as mission critical for the larger goods of the country, larger good of the country.
Thank you, Mayor. I was your neighbor before grad school. I was at 87 from work.
Howdy, neighbor.
I care about three issues: education, economy, healthcare. And I did go to a private school, but that's because my parents had a choice: public school or private school. And I'm willing to bet that if 9 out of 10 New Yorkers, if they had that same choice and could afford it, they would choose private school. What I'm very interested in is it seems like you have a perennial enemy of Edo Moskowitz at Success Academy. And I just want to know if you can tell me one thing that you do that Success Academy does not do better.
Sure, and I will be the first to say I do not equate Success Academy with the larger charter school movement. I think the charter school movement is very diverse, and there's some elements of that movement I feel very kindred with, and some I don't. And I think the essence of why I have an issue with her is to the question earlier about exclusion. And it's been, you know, the New York Times did some very powerful reporting to prove that there is unfortunately a pattern in Success Academy that if kids don't perform as well, they could be eased out and suggested to go elsewhere. I think the problem with the model is it's not sustainable, it's not scalable, it's based on a lot of private money, and it can be exclusionary. So I just don't think it works. Even if individual kids succeed, then I'm very happy for them, but I don't think it works for the larger community. Okay, I think we have time for a few more. Yes, coming alive. Coming alive.
Yes.
It's wait, I gotta decide what county you are. Let's see.
Okay.
I want the megapixel board. I want that in my life. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Advocacy,
Mhm.
parent advocacy groups.
Yes.
Okay. Did you have that support when you were in Albany trying to get, you know, the budget passed for, you know, getting this pre-K and kindergarten? And I'm going to put a plug in for my group here in Washington, D.C., which is called PAVE, Parents Amplifying Voices in Education. We are strong here in the District of Columbia. And our 2 points, and I'm going to shut up, for this year is to put in the budget money for out-of-school time programs and for mental health.
Amen.
We were just at a budget engagement issue at Eastern High School, lobbying for the things that we want, those 2 issues this year. Did you have those kind of groups?
Yes.
We have a very good group here.
We had something better than that. We did have that,
Mhm.
and we needed it in Albany, but we had something better, and it was called an election. And I'm not being facetious. No, it again, more than we ever imagined. And I would say this is a very powerful model for anyone at any level, from the most local to statewide, whatever it is. Bring this one to the people if you can find a way, whether a referendum or through a candidate. When I avoided a primary with 41% against a very strong field, and then I won the general with 73% of the vote, and my number one thing was tax the wealthy for pre-K for all, I guarantee you there was not certainly a Democrat in Albany who didn't register that and have either a warm embrace of it or, you know, deep concern. Certainly in the case of our governor, it was deep concern. And it gave us high ground. And luckily our state assembly, to their great credit, had for a long time cared about this issue. We had a Republican state senate and a ill-defined governor. And so we did have that parent activism, but it was already kind of the die was already cast by the power of the election. Yes.
My question is, what do you think of the current New York mayor's approach to education policy?
It's really honestly too soon to tell. I know, look, he's a product of New York City Public Schools, which I really appreciate. He clearly believes in equity. I don't yet understand enough the direction. But I do know, for example, he's taken a huge interest from his own experience in addressing what is being missed in the early efforts to understand what kids need. Dyslexia is one really good example that he has championed, like early screening for dyslexia and early support. That moves me. I think we have, again, lost many kids, lost many years because those things weren't done right. So I'm very hopeful, but I want to see more of what his specific vision is. This side, yes.
Just wondering, where did you find the room and the teachers to carry this out?
Well, we didn't calculate exactly right. So this is a really important quick story, because this story is actually, to me, empowering that you can mess up the equation and still succeed. So we, on the back of that envelope that day, we basically got exactly right the number of students we thought we could reach in the first year. We believed that there would be enough teachers because at that time, there was a huge demand for teachers to be able to come into the New York City Public Schools because it is one of the better paying, has good benefits, all that. So there was a demand. We knew early childhood was particularly prized among teachers and young people coming out of schools of education. It wasn't perfectly scientific, but we knew that we had enough tools, and it proved to be true. We didn't know, would parents, if you build it, will they come? We weren't sure. And that's where that outreach effort was so important, but that worked beyond our wildest dreams. What did we do wrong? We totally messed up the space equation, like totally. It's humorous how much we messed it up, because we had a combination of some faulty information and anecdotal experience that blinded us into thinking that more public schools had available space than actually did. So we found out that we had a number of communities where we were depending on public schools to provide extra classrooms. They just didn't have them. The good news was it forced us in midstream. This was all happening really, really fast in the spring of 2014, looking to opening day of schools in September. It forced us to rethink the model. And we said, okay, let's do a kind of grand coalition, charter schools, religious schools of all kinds, community-based organizations. And actually, folks readily engaged for practical and philosophical reasons. And it ended up even strengthening the program in many ways, because it built a much bigger constituency and more inclusive constituency. So, but I will tell you, there was a series of meetings in the spring of 2014 where we were, to use the clinical phrase, we were freaked out that we had not factored this in quickly enough into our thinking. And I have been talking to a lot of folks in policy programs over the last year in different institutions. And I think when I talk about this, there's kind of a look of shock that the notion of policy design was kind of violated here. It was not like we are going to perfect the policy, and when we're done in the laboratory, we will then announce the policy and work to achieve it. We didn't have that luxury. We thought we had one shot, and this is the reality of political capital, momentum, timing. We had one shot, and we believed we had to go big, we had to go bold. We could have failed at that moment and had to reduce our goals or slow our initiative. But again, that energy and momentum and the glare of the lights. In the 60s, they had a great phrase, the whole world is watching. I mean, in our situation in New York, like everyone was watching this thing, and everyone accountable for it knew that. And somehow we spun out of our mistake and actually got there. We did hit our number by opening day. And again, with a quality level we felt very good about. If you don't stop me, I'll go for another. Are you stopping me or not? I got one. You didn't stop me in time.
So as a PR student, I'm just interested in
PR student.
PR, public relations.
Okay. I didn't know there was such thing as a PR student. Okay.
I'm just interested if you could go more into detail about the strategy of the outreach, because I know you chose like those community-based locations, but also maybe like the key messaging points, and then the methods that you did to just like who was present there and how did they present in maybe just like a fun, like relatable way that wasn't, stressing the parents out or anything.
That's a great question. It was taking it to the streets. It really was. The whole thing. Yeah, again, I look back kind of in wonder at how many pieces clicked into place. Something simple, here's for your PR learning, going back to the basics. And there were these big, colorful pre-K for all banners, like everywhere in New York City. It was scary how perfectly diffused they were all over the city. And it was interesting, something as old school as a giant canvas banner, like that really got a lot of attention. We used every methodology of mass media in all languages. Of course, we did that, laying down that foundation. I think word of mouth became absolutely crucial. Like the hardest thing to track was probably the single most valuable, because as each parent became convinced, of course, they would tell their family and parent circle, like, oh my God, this thing actually looks real and is free. But the grassroots piece kind of was the good deal breaker. And you're exactly right. It was not distant. As unfortunately some school bureaucracies can be to parents. It was very much, you don't have to come to us, we're coming to you. In communities, like I said, if you're in a beauty salon or a barbershop or a street fair or a barbecue, and these very enthusiastic, generally younger folks come up wearing their pre-K for all t-shirts to spread the good news about something that's free for your child, that's a winning equation. But we train people to be positive, to be reassuring, to welcome questions, to not be upset if parents were hesitant. We expected that hesitancy. And to say, whatever you need will help you. If you want to go tour the school, If you need help locating the right location and making sure you can get in there, we did facilitate enrollment. We didn't want it to be user unfriendly. We wanted it to be a very warm embrace. And I think that communicated a lot. In the vein of the medium is the message, I think it communicated what the actual experience for their kids would be as well. And with that, I'm being knocked off the stage. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much again, Mr. de Blasio, and thank you to everyone for attending and joining us today. As a reminder, if you pick up a flyer outside, we will be having 3 more sessions. Vanna White, beautiful. We will be having 3 more sessions with Mr. de Blasio, as well as with all of our other fellows. We have more exciting seminars coming up, so we hope to see you all there. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everybody. That was good. All right.
Okay,
Look at the red on red. Good morning,
So what did you think?
Sorry, I feel like sometimes. Student associates, if you want to come up and meet with us after, thank you.